Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending the seminar, the webinar today, which we are going to switch to a slightly different format. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Lorraine Weatherspoon, and I am a professor in human nutrition at Michigan State University. I have done extensive research over the years in several countries in Africa, most recently in Uganda, and I teach, I do research, and I also direct the didactic program in dietetics at Michigan State University. Two of our speakers, unfortunately, cannot attend today, and this was something that was unintentional, and it happened at the last minute, but we do have one guest speaker who's actually going to be a keynote speaker, and I will introduce her shortly. But we switched the format also so that it's more of a regular Zoom format, so that we will have the keynote address, and then we will allow for open discussion among all of the participants, which we feel will be really valuable. If there are any quick questions before we begin, please let us know right now, and I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and begin with the presentation today. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. So just to begin with, the public dialogue series is something that the Alliance for African Partnership has instituted for a long time, since they've been operating at Michigan State University. And the topic for today's series is specifically looking at how we can strengthen nutrition and food security monitoring platforms, especially as they relate to the agri-food systems in Africa. I think just generally, just as a quick little introduction before I introduce the guest speaker, we all recognize that we have been involved with a plethora of interventions, concerns about nutrition, and we've made a lot of great strides. However, unfortunately, we still see concerns relative to maternal and child nutrition. And recently, we've seen an increase in diet-related chronic diseases on the continent of Africa, things like especially the non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, obesity, and there's no question that there is a relationship with the food production system or the agri-food system, as well as aspects that relate to food insecurity. So we cannot forget that COVID recently happened, but in addition to COVID, we have many natural disasters that have impeded our progress along the way. And so one of the things that we know is that child wasting, iron deficiency anemia, deficiency that's related to folic acid deficiency, especially in women of reproductive age, and stunting rates, which is an indication, as most of you know, if you work in nutrition, of chronic undernutrition, just seem to persist across many of our countries. And so we want to make sure that we try to do our best as healthcare professionals that work in the area of food and nutrition to try to alleviate some of these concerns. Now, usually when I think of October, I think of World Nutrition, World Food Day, and we always think of one day, we think of 1 month that we dedicate to nutrition. And so given the concerns related to nutrition, it wasn't surprising that the African Union decided that we want to make the entire 2022 the year of nutrition. And they really want to focus, and they want all of us to focus, and I think we all do as well, on strengthening resilience in nutrition. That's the theme that they want us to focus on, but also incorporating food security, and then how can we strengthen our agri-food systems, which you know are critical, not just from a food production perspective, but also from an economic as well as productivity perspective, and undoubtedly related to health, positive health outcomes. one of the things we struggled with, which Hetty's going to, like I said, I'll introduce this in a minute, which she's going to address more in depth, is that our monitoring and surveillance systems, unfortunately, not as consistent and in some cases not as reliable as we'd like them to be. And in order to better address the concerns we have, we really need to figure out a way, especially I would say within the continent, given the contrast that we have, but also the fact that we really want to try to work together for positive outcomes, try to see how we can better address some of these inconsistencies. Okay, so things that we're concerned about, and again, Hetty will focus on some of these things, are the integration of data collection, data quality, how we manage data better, how we can coordinate intervention approaches. And again, ultimately, we want to maximize positive outcomes at all levels. A key focus of the African Alliance Partnership at Michigan State University and all its partner institutions something happened. I got muted accidentally. Okay, so one of the key foci of the African Alliance Partnership, as well as the partner institutions, is how we can enhance institutional capacity to do these things. And we don't believe in I and me, we believe in us and we. And this is the reason why we are having this conversation today, and look forward to some of the comments you have. So I'm quickly going to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Hetty Schoenfeld, who is co-director of the African Research University Alliance Center of Excellence in Sustainable Food Systems in Pretoria, South Africa. She also is the chair in Nutrition and Food Security at the University of Pretoria. Her research focuses very, very applicably to linking nutrient quality and quality of foods, specifically to sustainable food systems. And her ultimate goal is how we can better attain nutrition and food security for all. She's very, very highly engaged in research, and she also focuses, again, within the context of her research, on how we can enhance country-specific food composition data, which is absolutely essential to making it possible to interpret the dietary outcomes of countries. So I'm going to hand over to her right now, and then we'll open up the floor for discussion. And we are looking forward to some of the input that we receive from the audience, because we know that this is going to be a really interesting and viable discussion. So Hetty, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Without further ado, I would just like to say that this afternoon, my talk will specifically be more on the role of higher education institutions in developing nutrition monitoring systems and strengthening capacity in Africa. So, and this work that I will be reporting on is, next slide, please, is the outcomes of an African Vice-Chancellor Regional Food Systems Dialogue that took place last year on the 9th of March as part of the UN Food Systems Summit 2021 dialogues. And the Africa Vice-Chancellor's Regional Food Systems Dialogues were represented in 4 regions of the African continent: the eastern part, the eastern region, northern region, southern and western Africa region. And then they all joined together on that particular day with selected representatives of the scientific committee, food systems academics, policy experts, and the participants from the regional food systems dialogues. Next slide. So 5 action tracks were identified in this process, and it was actually very interesting to see that all of them, to a lesser or minor extent, were identified by the 4 different regions in Africa, which actually show quite a coherence in what we are actually identifying as being very important to move Africa forward. First of all, is to ensure access to safe and nutritious foods for all. Now, for us as nutritionists, we would like to say nutrient-dense foods and not so much focus on energy. Secondly, the shift to sustainable consumption patterns. Thirdly, to boost nature positive production. Fourthly, to advance equitable life. And the 5th one is to build resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stress. And I think that particularly came very much out of the fact that we were still in a pandemic. And during this time, there were also floods and fires and earthquakes in certain parts of Africa that actually show how vulnerable our food systems actually are. Next, thank you. So what are the key constraints that they identified that affect transformation towards a more sustainable food system? First of all, it is something that is not quite unique to Africa. It is actually something quite challenging in the whole world, is enough multi-stakeholder engagement. There's a lack of coherent linkages among stakeholders. There's also youth restlessness, and I think that's particularly true in Africa. We have this huge bulk in growth in the youth under the age of 30, which are in many instances now well educated and not able to find in the formal sector actually employment. And then there's silos within and between higher education institutions, which is part of the reason why the African Research University Alliance were formed between the 17 top universities in Africa to foster collaboration between universities and try to retain the intelligence within Africa so that our masters and our PhDs do not go to other continents and then do not want to come back and contribute in their home countries. And this program is really bringing new fruits as it's now going into its 4th year of actually actively engaging within Africa. And you're welcome to look at the ARUA website to see if your institution is engaged, or if you or otherwise just reach out to any of the centers of excellence that are listed under ARUA, because the idea is not to be exclusive, but to be inclusive. And if you're interested in a subject, just write to the principal investigator, say you would like to be part of that, and you will be informed of whatever courses or conferences we are holding. If we look at capacities building, we know that there's a student skills gap between what they've learned and how do they apply it actually in the real world. Because the theoretical background which we actually are teaching to students are not actually enabling them to adapt swiftly enough to changing circumstances. There's also limited time and opportunities for university staff research, which really is quite clear if we look at the outputs of African research, of African universities in general. Student training is very often not focused on interdisciplinary skills production. And that's one thing that we have learned now as never before, that if we want to advance, we have to learn how to work in groups of different backgrounds actually have real great breakthroughs in new knowledge. There's also limited funding for high-tech facilities required for skills development in Africa. And that's why we sometimes very tempted to actually, it's just much easier to go to a laboratory in a first world country and get your training there. But once you get back home, you have that challenge again of not having access to the correct facilities. And that's why we're trying to say, well, stay in Africa and let's build Africa so that you would actually want to stay here and make a difference in everyday lives. Next slide. So the next constraint is the information gap, that in fact there's poor identification of data gaps and uncoordinated resource mobilization, as well as a poor flow of information. And we know that information is power. And if we have access at the right time to the right information, we are much more able to make intelligent choices that is required and can be done in a short time. If we look at resource management, we have inadequate program funding in general and inadequate capital for coping with rising input costs. And that is especially true with the shock of the Ukraine war on the whole world, on food systems in general, that the price of fertilizer that has tremendously increased during the same time, being driven by the war in Ukraine, as well as the shortage of wheat. And that this leads particularly to unsustainable resource mobilization. So if we look at political support, we find that in general, there's a poor link with ministries as to engaging with academics and with the public in general to know exactly what are the needs of society at that specific time. And there's a lot of political red tape regarding the redirection of food waste. And as we know, in Africa, our food waste is much different than the first world food waste problems. Ours is still mostly on farm and not as in first world countries after the consumer has purchased the food and the food is in the house. We also have that, we recognize that, but the shift is definitely still not towards the consumer, but actually still much more on farm. So next slide. Yes. So what are our opportunities to bounce back better? So first, we have to adopt a system thinking approach to dealing with complex issues. We have to co-design and co-create research initiatives and have to embrace diversity and inclusivity. Information and communication technology, or ICT, and big data must be harnessed as critical enablers. We have hosted a big data conference in Kenya, in Nairobi, 2 years ago, and it was absolutely amazing to hear what a difference big data makes to ordinary farmers by using a simple medium such as WhatsApp, providing them with in-time technology to make decisions about rainfall patterns and what to plant and what to harvest when. And then the ongoing relevance of research with appropriate translation into practice while maintaining a continuous pursuit of quality and excellence. So research must be effectively translated into informed policies and practices, society-relevant curriculums with emphasis on agricultural sciences, while we are embracing practically on-farm skills. And this is really speaks to the heart of the fact that if we do research for research's sake, it will forever just be standing on a shelf somewhere in a dusty office. But if we incorporate translating science and research into everyday problems in society, we as scientists can make a significant difference to where we move forward to in agricultural science in general. Next slide. So what are the skills and capabilities for researchers and students to navigate, trigger, and steward complex food systems transitions? So first of all, as I've already spoken about ICT, we are speaking about the application of technology to tackle complex problems. Innovation in technology to scale up agricultural productivity and accelerate food security. And this is really needed, as we all know that many countries in Africa are now reporting the highest level ever of undernutrition and food insecurity. And we need digital innovation to be able to know exactly where are our key problem areas where aid is needed or where we have to shift food more quickly through the food system in order to reach the consumer that are looking for that particular food product. And I think to a large extent, big companies, and we know that there's 5 large food companies in the world, have really embraced that technology to their own benefit. But how can we tap into that to bring nutritious food, nutrient-dense foods, fresh products mostly, being produced locally and consumed locally? How can we bring that digital innovation into that particular area? The second one is entrepreneurial skills. We have to co-create innovations or solutions that respond to community needs. We need hands-on skills. And for that, we need particularly critical thinking, problem solving, and communication skills. And we know that in higher education, this is something that we all aim that our students will be able to achieve within 4 years. But unfortunately, if we look at what the results are of the training currently, this is a serious area that needs to be addressed more effectively in what we are offering in our curriculum to students. Then people or soft skills is something that most of us only gain when we are really working in the field, in the community, or in a particular position where we would like to make a difference to everyday's lives. So entrepreneurship for the youth, young women and mothers are particularly needed, as to a large extent, young women and mothers in the past have been bypassed in many programs. And we know that if a mother or have access to any kind of way to earn an income, she actually more prudently spent that income towards having a more healthy family than what the men does. And that is something that has been proven over and over again in research. And then because of our bulging youth population, we have to see how we can enhance the entrepreneurial skills of the youth. And where should we start? Shouldn't we already start in primary school by encouraging children to think in an entrepreneurial way of how to look at everyday problems? And actually they are so innovative in their thinking because they are not boarded into pre-thinking, and that we should really encourage that at a young age so that they can continue with those ideas and nurture those ideas to take it into real life problems. So also our entrepreneurial skills within different stakeholder groups, connecting different universities, different research organizations, different NGOs, and whoever is interested in working in this field, we have to find new ways to work and collaborate together in order to produce a more healthy and nutritious Africa. Next slide, please. Now, when it comes to networking, we know that we are very comfortable to collaborate with our like-minded colleagues. So in the private sector engagement, researchers, particularly at higher education institutions and governments, really don't trust the private sector. Maybe because of things that happened in the past, but WHO and FAO have all now actually started acknowledging that to solve the larger problems of hunger and undernutrition, as well as overnutrition in the world, we have to collaborate with private sector, and not only by slapping legislation on salt reduction and sugar intake on the products of private sector, but to actively engage them how to offer more healthy food in a nutritious way to consumers that are convenient and also does not contain high salt, high fat, and high sugar at a very low cost. So, and that call for all of us to be part of finding the solution. And for that, we really need critical thinking skills as well as communication skills. And to a large extent, we perhaps may have it in little islands, but we needed to have a common voice within sub-Saharan Africa. We have to be open-minded and receptive to inform change. And change is the one thing that none of us inherently like. But in order to make differences into the way that we are currently progressing in the outcomes of our food system, we will have to be more open-minded and be willing to change, to be more sustainable in what we are doing, and not be so focus-driven on short-term solutions. The T-shaped skills of excellent knowledge of and skills in specific areas and good at collaborative work are the kind of things that comes to mind. Next slide, please. So when it comes to research, we know that the translation of research can result in informed policy and practice. So it's critical for our policymakers to actually be informed by local policies and practices before we just merely follow what the first world countries are forcing through the bodies such as Codex, or I think about the UN summit and those the like. We must also have an African voice that say, well, what you are saying about obesity being driven by too high protein intake in first world countries is definitely not true for Africa. They have to be informed about that. You have to know how much protein is consumed within your country, and you have to inform them that it's not true, that most of the protein in Africa is coming from plant-based sources. And if we can just add a small amount, 30 grams of animal protein to that diet, more of the micronutrients will be absorbed and less of it will just simply not be wasted because it's not digested within the body. And our politicians don't understand that because they're only exposed to the loud voice of the first world countries. So our curriculum needs to be relevant to the needs of society in order to address that. Our agricultural sciences is important in Africa to sustain and improve the food systems. And we know that apart from South Africa, where we have large-scale farmers, most of Africa is reliant on small-scale farmers that deliver consistently a high-quality product, but that they're unable to sometimes find markets for that products within a short time. But now we have many examples where these farmers will come together and form small consortiums where they speak to the direct supermarkets in the area to produce throughout the year products to be sold locally within a day of being harvested. So most of the time, many of the excuses are no longer valid because we have examples of where it is working and where it's not working. And I think that is what we really need to see. What in your, within a community, why are some people better off and others are worse off, having the same access to resources, and use those as an example within the society of what we should learn of what that family is doing correctly, and how can we apply that at scale. Researchers and students should be strongly encouraged to embrace practical on-farm skills and to translate those skills into knowledge of the beneficiaries or who receive that training. So skills in interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work is really required going forward. We have to build hard and soft skills in sustainability science. It's also, as I've just learned, as I've returned from an animal science conference, that it's really important to understand what the farmer wants. It's not only us to come from outside to say, well, if you want to do this and that and whatever, first understand what they want to do, what they want to accomplish. And then you work from that base. Maybe they don't want to work 365 days of the year. Maybe they're quite satisfied to work maybe 200 days a year and take a rest in between. And so it's very important to understand the audience to who you are talking and not assume your own values and in order to be credible. So build skills on how to integrate teaching, research, and service to community. We also have to build skills for public policy analysis, and because we know that monitoring and evaluation is extremely important, because otherwise it will just have no effect. If we put a sugar tax in, we see that there's a reduction in sugar intake for the first 6 months, and then people just go back to where they were before the tax. And then actually that policy did not really effectively change people's behavior. And then one should really revisit it and say, well, in fact, we don't think this policy is no longer necessary within country because we didn't change people's behavior. And that's why we need critical thinking going forward. And then we will also have to have more focus on applied research rather than basic research. And I know that's very controversial because I just say that I cannot do applied research unless I have a knowledge of basic research. But this is what the Vice Chancellor said. Next slide, thank you. So partnerships. How important is partnerships to unlock these food systems transformation? We know that it's needed in all the areas of research and innovation. We need sustainable partnerships that have equal engagement and benefits. And partnership with private sector, government, community, and academia is really very important. And to have these platforms where all these players are regularly meeting with each other, building confidence in their opinions and and shaping their opinions is really what is needed. So public-private partnerships must be formed with the support of government and not in isolation, in order that government also keep track of growth and moving forward. Partnership with civil society, we also know that that is really important, and that our South-South-North partnerships should not, we should build on and as much as possible. So the Green Education column of universities, colleges at VET is also something that is now new that I don't actually know much about, but maybe any one of you in the audience that know more about that can add to that, but it's something that is quite a new thing to me as well. And then the universities need equitable partnership with training that focus on research as well. Next slide, please. So stakeholder engagement is where universities should connect with communities, and the universities in cities must also connect with farmers in rural areas. So we have, within the University of Pretoria in South Africa, we have at least five informal sites where students actually learn soft skills working with very low income migrating populations that have actually no resources. And not only does the community benefit from it, the students learn tremendously by those engagements. And we think it's very important that we foster those relationships. And then universities in cities that must connect with farmers in rural areas is very often, I mean, it's very different to when I was a young student, where people that studied agriculture actually grew up on a farm. And now new research shows us that almost 80% of students studying agricultural sciences have never been on a farm. So it's a totally different population group that is now being trained. And it's very important that they have hands-on skills of what is actually going on a farm and how farmers actually work 24 hours, 365 days of the year in order to make sure that the harvest comes in at the right time, at the right quality. And how can we link this to research and ICT? And that is really important, that we link research, extension, and the end users using ICT as we go forward. Leveraging technology to enable connection is also very powerful. And I mean, I have many examples that we have a training session with students from Africa. We just maintain a WhatsApp group where we alert each other to funding opportunities, to training opportunities. And it's so easy, and it's such a friendly communication medium that is actually a low data user, and you don't need a special anything to be able to do that. Last slide, thank you. So for me, in conclusion, I would like to say that in transforming African agriculture and food systems, we find it an opportunity to improve health and livelihoods with shared prosperity and providing sufficient, safe, nutritious, and culturally appropriate and consumer-driven food for the 21st century Africa, while we are empowering graduates and researchers to demonstrate research excellence. And with that, I would like to thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Skonfeld. That was a really, really, I think, illuminating presentation, and it covered, while Dr. Skonfeld focused on the role of higher education in developing nutrition monitoring systems, as well as how we can strengthen what we're doing already. I think it really captured a lot of the key concepts that we are concerned about related to nutrition. Before I introduce the person who's going to help with the questions and answers, and I do have some that we have already, I just thought I'd do a quick synopsis. So some of the take-home messages that I got from Dr. Skonfeld's presentation, and I apologize, I didn't put my video on in the beginning, so everybody can see who I am right now. So I think when we think about food and nutrition, we think about going from seed to fork. And so this is where the agricultural production piece becomes very important. But I think in nutrition, we take it beyond that to the association with health outcomes. And it's something that I think is critical for the work that all of us are doing. And then that leads me, it's a perfect segue into the next section that Dr. Skonfeld emphasize, and that we really and truly need an interdisciplinary approach. The whole concept of partnerships, the whole concept of sustainability, the whole concept of recognizing that none of our disciplines stand alone. For example, a lot of the work that I've done include food science, it included physicians, it includes folk from industry. And I think that recognizing that we all have to complement the things that we do will definitely make for a much, much, much better future as we look at nutrition and nutritional outcomes. I think the other thing that the other take-home message that I got from the presentation was the importance of practical application. So many of us are scientists, many of us work in the research world, and I absolutely 500% agree that having 1 million publications is completely irrelevant if that cannot be translated into something meaningful, specifically related to policies, but also the person. One of the questions talks about how do we reach those individuals who are most affected, and how can we better apply what we do? And so we need the fancy research, technological piece, but we also need the practical solution piece, or the applied piece, which is absolutely important. One thing that I want to encourage many of our colleagues here on the continent of Africa, and we've been working in this area, is thinking more. I like the concept of local. I like the concept of enhancing what we have. I like the concept of the fact that there are many things that we grew up with that sometimes our young people don't eat anymore. Sometimes our people who need these things don't eat anymore. Indigenous foods, simple things. For example, in Uganda, I saw one question came from a colleague from Uganda, using something that's readily available, something like silverfish or protein to enhance the micronutrient, but also the protein and macronutrient content, using something as simple as tomatoes. All of us produce tomatoes which has vitamin C, which can enhance the absorption of certain nutrients. And then from a governmental perspective, some of you might be in more of a policy role or governmental role. One of the things when I was growing up in South Africa many years ago, we had a subsidy, for example, on wheat bread. So we're here in the US, the wheat bread is the most expensive. When I was growing up, and I don't know if this is still true, maybe Dr. Skonfeld can let me know, the whole wheat bread was the cheapest bread. A lot of people didn't want to eat it, and we had to educate them. It was the tastiest, it was the healthiest, and it was the cheapest. So subsidies play a big difference. And I think, there are a lot of products that are out there. So to help us with questions and answers, of course, Dr. Skonfeld will still be around. The next part of the presentation involves a question and answer section. I will read some of the questions, but I first quickly want to introduce Dr. Gertrude Puente, she is a senior lecturer in dietetics at Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and a proud alumnus, of Michigan State University, where she completed her PhD. She was also, I saw there are some future scholars on the program. She was also one of our future scholars that was supported through the African Alliance Partnership. She has done tremendously well since completing her PhD and Future Scholars Program. She's now a research fellow, NIH Fogarty Global Health Fellowship Fellow with the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. She was also part of the Borlaug Higher Education, Agricultural Research and Development. So her knowledge about nutrition is tremendous, and she's going to help us with the question and answer section. And then to tie everything up at the end, we'll have Dr. Agnes Manguela. She is the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at Lilongwe University of Agriculture. I think I mentioned in the beginning that this program was co-sponsored by both Michigan State University's African Alliance Partnership and Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And so we want to thank them tremendously. So Dr. Manguela will summarize. I'm sure she'll reinforce some of the concepts that we just mentioned right now, and the importance of the interdisciplinary nature of what we need to do in food. She's a food scientist by training, and again, is really, really supportive of enhancing international collaborations, enhancing access to healthy food. So I will start. I will read some of the questions, and any one of our panelists can, hold on a second. So any one of our panelists can answer the question.
So Lorraine, I just want to intervene a minute, if you will give me a chance. So
Absolutely.
yes, South Africa is still using subsidies as a way to enhance a better food intake. 15 food products are subsidized, and it's 14% cheaper because there's no value added tax. It includes brown bread. As you've stated, more people in South Africa eat brown bread than white bread because it's more subsidized than white bread. And then it's maize meal, and then it's mostly single agricultural food products that's included. We've also added sanitary pads and paraffin subsequently, as that is a fuel source. And the other one is out of a humanitarian perspective, but which we really think is a great breakthrough. But it's one of the most effective ways of channeling a population towards a more healthy eating pattern.
Thank you. Well, I'm pleased to hear that. I always said that I always call the white bread here in the US bubblegum bread because it doesn't have anything in it. So my students laugh when I say that. Okay, so the first question, and again, Dr. Puente will help with monitoring the responses to this. The question was, what is the extent of nutrition insecurity? Who are those that are most left behind? And what are some of the sustainable solutions that we can offer as part of the recommendations from this group? So again, it can come from us, and I'm sure that some of us might have some answers, but most certainly, if anybody in the audience wants to make a contribution, you're more than welcome to do so. So that's the first question.
So actually in Africa, we have the most, so migration is something that happens worldwide. It's something that is effectively, I mean, we see many of the Syrians, you know, leaving their country because we have currently in Ukraine and Russia, people leaving their countries, flying from war areas. But just pure migration in Africa is one of the highest in the world, where people will actually go to another country to seek a better lifestyle for job opportunity. And these huge migrating populations is treated in different countries in different ways. We know, for instance, in Kenya, on the border to Ethiopia, there are large camps of generations now of families living there because they're not welcome in their own country, but Kenya is not taking responsibility. They don't want that extra burden on them. And those populations are really at risk of food insecurity and also of pure hunger. And of course, all our major cities or in Africa is now actually, a lot of them have peri-urban areas that are dependent on a city that's not providing services to them. So they don't have access to water, they don't have access to sewage, to rubbish removal, they don't have real roads or infrastructures. And how are we coping to recognize that this migrating population, they need access to health services? Those children have to be immunized. Why? Because we don't want another Ebola crisis, or we don't want whatever disease we are trying to eradicate worldwide. We will find in those populations, because they're really the people that are the most vulnerable. And then we know that our aging population, where families used to look very well in a traditional way at the aging population within their families, these people are now pushed away because the family has moved away for better job opportunities, but the parents have stayed behind, and mostly they looked after the children. But when they become grandparents, you know, they are left alone, and they become very vulnerable to any shocks. And I don't think that we have collectively yet an answer how to really help our vulnerable populations in an effective and a sustainable way. And I think that is why we collectively have to come up with solutions that can be rolled out at scale in our different culturally specific environments.
Thank you so much. Gertrude, would you go over the next couple questions and so that we hear from you as well?
Okay, the second question is, how do we best integrate gender into food and nutrition monitoring systems? So the floor is open to anybody for an answer for that, or our keynote speaker can respond, or any other panelists.
Go ahead, Steve. I see
Steve.
You raised your hand. You can unmute and you can go ahead and chat. If you unmute, that'll be great. I saw your hand raised.
Thank you, Lorraine. So basically what the lady before us just said, I think how to integrate women in the nutrition. Basically, I think women are the most producers. We tend to, they're the ones who remain back at home in our farms. So they tend to be the ones working at the farm level. So they need to be trained, like empowered in some ways, depending on the organizations. I like something about what Professor said about practical solutions. When it comes to things like practical solutions, we have a lot of information and many of us are knowledgeable, but we don't put those knowledge into practice. So this means we need younger people to be able to train or train more younger women in terms of how to be able to do value addition towards nutrition, because nutrition is basically a very key thing and a very key pillar in a human being growing. So in any given time, when we tend to eat products that are less nutritious, then we have problems. Like in the beginning, you explained the issues that are affecting people now, more diseases in terms of you find people, some are anemic. Then you'll find some people have issues, cancer, and many other diseases that we're fighting in the world. So basically, we need to train younger women in terms of how to be able to value add in terms of the products they are able to produce. Then we're able to train them on how to do the value addition and how to keep them, depending on the crops that they're planning to plant and things like that.
Thank you so much. I think Isaac had his hand raised next, and then after that, Dr. Makwela. Are you still around, Isaac?
No, I lowered it. Thank you.
Okay. Agnes, do you want to add your comment?
Yes, I just wanted to add on the issue of gender and nutrition, in that as we are all handling the triple burden of malnutrition, we shouldn't forget that the NCDs are equally affecting especially the males and also families. And mostly, as much as the women may be the ones who cook and maybe dictate on how food is consumed in the houses, it is usually the men also who influence the dietary pattern of the household. And also, it is also the men that will influence available food for young children. If you have underage, both the adherence to breastfeeding and the kind of complementary food that the household can access. So as we're talking of gender, we also need to bear in mind that the men have a role, and they also have to be informed and be equipped to be able to make nutrition conscious decisions. I also just want to go back to the first question on who is vulnerable. Another area of vulnerability is the increasing urbanization that we as Africa are facing. And it is creating the urban poor sector, whereby access to food is also a different challenge, which is unique as compared to the challenge that we have for the rural smallholder farmers who are able to produce some of the food on their own. So that is also another category of vulnerable section of a population that also needs to be considered. Thank you.
Absolutely. Excellent points that I think we all sometimes forget that yes, most certainly when we think about gender, we think about the vulnerability, especially of women of reproductive age, but we also know that males play a very important role, and sometimes that gets forgotten. And I agree, as we look at the increase now in the continent of Africa in the non-communicable diseases that are diet-related, such as cardiovascular disease and diabetes, most certainly we cannot forget, given that the males get hit with these kinds of problems as much as females, in another sense with some of the things from a reproduction perspective, that we want to make sure we include them. The next question, Dr. Mkwante.
Okay, there's a comment from
Okay,
the
go
chat.
ahead.
I think on the same, on gender, indicating that women majorly should be periodically trained to unveil the importance of food preservation and sustainability in Africa.
Okay.
So I'll go to the third question. The third question is, how can smallholders, who are majority in my country, Uganda, be helped to have efficient storage and market information? Storage and market information about smallholder farmers in Uganda. So the floor is also open for discussion.
I'll just begin by saying really quickly that I think that Dr. Skonto made a very, very important point during her presentation, that a lot of times large holder farmers and large producers, and I know especially in the US, but again, when we think about the market, and we think about a lot of our funding agency supporters, and with no disrespect intended, you know, we have a lot of products that are marketed as supplemental products on the continent of Africa that are not necessarily local, or, in my opinion, sometimes culturally appropriate. And so from the smallholder farmer perspective, if we can try to promote smallholder products to a large extent, and also recognize that smallholder farmers are also more likely to experience some of the nutrition inadequacies themselves, where sometimes, you know, they're so limited in the market that whatever they sell, sometimes they don't necessarily, they're not able to utilize the same money, or they don't utilize the same money to buy healthy food. So there's that double whammy aspect over there. But I think that from a policy perspective, probably there needs to be a lot more engagement with regard to promoting smallholder products. And so I think each country has its own way of doing this. I'm not in economics, but I know that we talked about the multidisciplinary approach. I know that people that work in that area and in business should hopefully be trying to engage smallholder farmers to a large extent than they have been in the past.
If I can just add to that, is that if we bring in the sustainability perspective, we do know that farmers are very adaptable, and particularly if we think about climate change, which is a real reality within many regions in Africa right now, and mostly it's going drier. It's very few areas that actually becomes wetter. And our indigenous, locally adopted foods are much more resilient to drought, to diseases, and there's much more drive to actually consume and communicate the importance of the consumption of the indigenous foods that our parents were mostly exposed to and that we actually value, but in many instances our children do not value anymore. And that is one way in which a farmer could perhaps protect himself. But I know that in there's a farmer network in and the high level performance, the HLP is a high level panel for FAO WHO. They brought out a success story of 50 farmers using digital technology or networks in Africa. And what we could do is we could send everyone the link afterwards, because I don't have it right now with me. But I know that there's a farmer network that uses very low bandwidth in Kenya, Tanzania, and I'm not sure which was the third country, which provide them twice a day with market information, with weather patterns, expected weather patterns, and it's a two-way communication as well. And I was amazed when I heard about that. So they can actually, if they experience a knowledge gap, such as, you know, there's a disease on their plants and they're not sure, they have access to a plant pathologist that immediately can assist them to say, well, this is what I would recommend you do. And as to market access, that app particularly were developed so that you can also attain where you can actually take your food products. But like I in my talk reported, that there are many farmers that now form small informal co-ops to actually assist each other to consistently produce foods 12 months of the year, which is what supermarkets want. If you want to have a foot in the supermarket, you can't only be one farmer. You need a consistent flow of that product to the market.
Thank you. Gertrude, or I think they might be, Flavius is asking a complicated question that I don't think I can answer. Do you want to go over that one, Gertrude?
Okay, there's a question. How can we harness the potential of nuclear-derived techniques to improve nutrition in Africa?
So the only nuclear techniques that I'm familiar with is where they radiolize spices. And that is something that is done consistently. You have a much better shelf life on the products. It used to be go off every 3 months. And that's a technology that's being used as a preservation technology in South Africa. I don't know how much it's adopted in the rest of Africa, but this is a common practice that all our spices or regularly radioized before they are being sold to consumers. So that, and I'm sure somebody in the audience may be able to add to this conversation. Please feel free.
Completely out of my area of expertise.
Yes, so I also know that it's been used quite extensively to produce foods for people that have to like the army or patrol communities where they just, it's not in a tin, it's in a much larger container to feed at least 50 people, and they actually radicalize that product as well. It works on the principle of a tinned food product, but it's just at a larger scale and it's shelf stable. So I know that they used it, the Americans used it in the, you know, in the Middle East as well. Yes, the military. And in South Africa, it was used in quite extensively for the troops that we sent to the Congo to assist there, so to keep peace. So that is, and yes, please, Flavius, go ahead.
Yes, please. Can you unmute, Flavius?
Okay, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to contribute. Even though I'm in a rowdy place, I still try to log on to the webinar to contribute. I observed that the nuclear-derived techniques is one of the areas we have underexplored in Africa. I'm a radiographer by discipline, and I specialize in children, pediatric radiography, and a radiation protection expert. Nuclear-derived techniques goes beyond just food preservation and self-life. Just like the speaker rightly said, we can monitor nutritional content in children, like the zinc content, vitamin A, malnutrition, undernutrition, overnutrition, childhood obesity, and all that, even stunting, what we call enteric gut disorder that affects the gut ecosystem. You can use nuclear-derived techniques, radioisotopes, to monitor them. You can monitor compliance of breastfeeding and look at interventions. Interventions could also be monitored using nuclear-derived techniques. But there is this general phobia, you know, when you talk about nuclear, people think of nuclear bombs and all that. We have the peaceful application of nuclear energy, and that is the background I'm talking about. Beyond just using nuclear for cancer treatment and other things.
Flavius, that sounds really fascinating.
Sorry,
will you be willing to share some references that we can include as a resource together with this webinar? If you have some references to, you know,
sure.
That'll be wonderful. That'll be
sure.
Wonderful.
The International Atomic Energy, in collaboration with the Food and Agriculture Organization, do a lot of work in this area. It's just that we don't look along that direction most of the time.
Yes, Flavius, as you were speaking, I was reminded of the fact that when we were looking at the fortification mix that we add to our staple foods, we actually used labeled isotopes to look at the absorbability of the iron and the zinc and the iodine which is in salt. So that's also a very clear example where you can use that technology to actually see what form of the micronutrient you need to supplement with that is shelf stable and that will be absorbed the most.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's,
Right,
you know,
thank
we
you.
talked about interdisciplinary, and this is a classic example of the fact that no discipline stands alone. Doesn't mean because I'm a registered dietitian that this is the only aspect. I need the food scientists, we need the nuclear physicists, we need the now I understand the folk that are and everybody, health professionals. So this is great. Absolutely great. And I know
So-
there've been several requests for the presentation is being recorded, and I will imagine that AAP will provide a recording on their website. And if there's Justin and Dr. Maletti, will they also provide a copy of the slides to the participants? You guys are muted, so I
We
don't.
will, yes, Lorraine, thank you very much. We will seek Hetty's approval first,
Of
and
course.
then we will do that once she
You
gives
know,
us
you
the
can,
go-ahead.
you feel free to share. I believe in you know, sharing is caring. So let's just share that. So, but also you just triggered something that I thought I should respond on. Now what was it?
We were talking about interdisciplinary.
Oh, the interdisciplinary, yes. So, I mean, we're working now currently with architecture and geography, and that's quite interesting. Why did we decide to do that? Because we are studying a particular population group that lives on a wetland. It's a migrating population group. And in order to describe each dwelling, we have to have a geographical indicator of some kind to be able to understand, you know, exactly, you know, which family are we talking about? Because if a child comes to the clinic for immunization, we have to actually link it to a particular stand, and those stands are not marked. So what do we do, you know? So we actually are working together with they are working together with Swedish, and they actually have sent one of our architecture students now to go and look at the programs they've been running for 17 years, in which they co-design communities within Sweden, which, I mean, normally you would say it's in such a highly skilled, highly, you know, for us, a very, very expensive country. We were not aware of the fact that there were such migrant populations that they could not even assign a house number to. So it's really interesting that we always assume it's just Africa that have specific problems. But when I spoke at a European meeting, and I said, well, 10% of all populations have at least, you know, 10% of all population in the world are vulnerable within each country. I saw everyone Google, and then the girl from Germany said, no, I thought it's impossible, but you're absolutely correct. It's actually higher in Germany. So it's something that, you know, people just do not recognize because maybe they don't get so much media attention as that's actually required to make a difference in their lives. And only we that are sitting with a real challenge to bring stunting and underweight down towards a downward trend, looking at the SDGs, which we have to report, are really battling to bring it down with all these shocks that we had to our local food systems, and not only the food systems, the whole environment in which we lived and operated. I mean, it had not only a physical effect, it had a social and an emotional effect on all of us. And it's so much nicer, in fact, to be able to just move around, being able to purchase what you want, to be able to travel and up, you know, as the world is opening up, we can just function much more normally, because that was the way we were taught to function. And being isolated in your own little hub, you know, you don't even know about how many people are really suffering around you because they can't cope emotionally with it. And I mean, I saw it very clearly when traveling into the Netherlands, that you know, they have huge problems moving luggage and people and so on. And a third of the people just booked off sick because they couldn't take these angry passengers, and because after coming out of COVID. And that's one thing that we've never have to neglect, is also the emotional and social needs of people, that we don't only feed the stomach, but we also feed the other needs of people. So we must have a holistic look. And I very much agree with you that we not only look at mothers and children, we have to look at the family. And the family may include a grandma or grandpa or extended sister or extended, which we have very much in South Africa's extended families. And if extended families are disrupted, there's always an orphan. That is the burden of that disruption. And it's true for many of our countries. So to keep a family intact is absolutely essential. And teach those children the traditional habits of good nutritious foods, and not running off to the cheap, high fat, high sugar alternatives, which is driving our obesity curve in particularly in Africa at an enormous extent.
Thank you. Now, we're not going to be preachers, and just because we said the webinar is going to end at 9:30, drag it until there. I see one very good comment. One of the things that I think is kind of like an elephant in the room is that, unfortunately, you know, in many African cultures, we still have a disparity between the way women versus male, we still have gender disparities, I guess is the word. And so Barnabas points to the fact that even though land for agriculture is owned by men, but main food production players are women, and yet unfortunately they do not get access, for example, to credit facilities. And I think going back to the policy perspective, I think that that is something that we as educators, we as scientists, we as individuals that work in whatever area that you work in, need to try to see the extent to which we can decrease that level of disparity, because I think that long gone are the days of my parents where, you know, we had specific gender roles. I think that there are some, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we acknowledge the value of all genders and actually all ages, just based also on what Dr. Sconfield just mentioned about all of the different generations.
So it's very true what he is saying, that in Africa it's very much so that women do not have access to credit, and also not to permanent land. So so land tenure is of course also of the essence. And we actually just published an article about that, of land tenure in Nigeria. But what we have realized in development programs is that small stock and chickens are something that is not considered a threat by men. So women can farm with those. Should they, you know, without having a dispute with whoever is chief or head of the household or whatever. So, and we encourage, you know, chicken cooping. As you know, the most economical food, protein, animal-derived source of food at this stage is eggs. So egg production is something that can really alleviate a lot of deficiency diseases at the household level. And it's something that is also extremely rewarding. I mean, you don't have to have a huge cash amount to be able to look after a couple of chickens, which will continually lay eggs for you and your family. The reality, of course, is that you have to make very sure that they're safe and do not land in anyone else's pot for dinner. But that we have seen the tuna program that Leeds University led in Tanzania. Actually, I think there was 8 African countries involved in that. Very clearly showed the difference that keeping chickens in households made to the nutrition outcomes of children. So perhaps we can conclude with that. I don't know, you know.
Well, I think
Yeah,
Gertrude
there's
has one
a-
more question, and then we'll have
Yes.
Dr. Manguela do the
Yes.
closing statement. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the question is, what can we say about online systems that are being used to monitor nutrition at government levels in Africa? How can universities access this information for contributing to policy and program recommendations?
I would like to speak to that program because I'm very passionate about that. First of all, find out who's your contact point in government for FAO and for WHO. You have the right to know. As a researcher, you have the right to know, or as an agency or as an NGO, you have the right to know that. You can actually go and look on the WHO website. Find that person, go and visit them. Tell them you want to improve the data that they're submitting, because many of that data is not informed by real research. It's all data that is reiterated. And then you say to them, this is an opportunity for us to put out a call for scientists to improve the data that is being reported on. I mean, I've looked at the Global Nutrition Report that comes out year on year by the UN. It's based on the oldest studies that's ever been done in South Africa. And I have volunteered my services to government to say that we will improve that data. We are scientists, we know exactly. So I have funded a project because we didn't have a national food consumption survey, except for the one on children under the age of 9 to inform food fortification program. But we had a national food consumption that only rolled out this year, which include all ages. And that data will definitely go into those databases. And so it's to some extent the responsibility of all of us to make sure that the UN is actually reporting the correct data. But I paid for a study for a group at Cape Town University to look at all the studies that was done on adults in the past 10 years and to come up with a conclusion of what people are consuming mostly, because dietitians, unfortunately, we have a tendency to report on nutrients and micronutrients, but the macro, micro, but we're not reporting on food. What food are people eating? How are they preparing that food? You know, and because it has an enormous effect on what is the nutrient content of that food. So we really reach out to because you have the right to know. Thank you.
Excellent. Dr. Manguela?
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Lorraine and Haiti, for such a wonderful session that we've had in terms of question and answer. And also thank you very much, Gertrude, for moderating the question and answer session. There are quite a number of issues that we have discussed in this session, and it just shows how important it is that as nutritionists, we should be fully equipped and also engage with the policyholders and the private sector that are implementing different nutrition interventions. I also want to highlight maybe from the discussion that we've had, the issue of digital innovation, because some of these issues of data that are being raised is the access of our people to their own data with regards to nutrition, with regards to food composition. As the scientists, we need to present it in such a way, not only for the policy makers, but also for the users, the households that we are discussing, the farmers that we are discussing. They need to receive this data and so that it can inform their behavior and their conduct nutrition-wise in their households. So it means as the universities and the scientists, we have that task so that we can present and provide the data to our people as well as the policy makers. The other issue that also maybe I want to mention is the issue of the collaboration and co-creation, both for research and for interventions, both for our students in terms of PhD, but also even the involvement of the private sector, government, and NGO. Many a times we've seen programs that have already been rolled out or have already been conceptualized, and it's too late for us to include the components of data quality or the components of data mining. And another thing also that highlights the importance of this nutrition and food security data is the capacity of our scientists on the continent to be able to mine and analyze data that is collected by statistical offices like the National Statistics Office, data on nutrition, on consumption, on food security, so that we are able to mine that data and inform nutrition interventions and nutrition programming within our countries. So it is really an important area that we need to examine the aspect of data quality and the analysis with regards to nutrition and food security. And I believe that this is just the beginning of our dialogue, and it will also inform some of the concepts that we may be developing around nutrition data. With those remarks, I would just like to appreciate all the members that we have participated, all the participants that have attended. Thank you very much for your involvement. And as it has been indicated, once the recording is done, it's going to be shared to the members. And as Ruana, we are very privileged to have had this chance to co-host this dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.